right, our next speaker, Jessica Robinson, is the co-founder and partner of Assembly Ventures. She is faculty at the Fast Future Executive on the future of mobility. Jessica is a mobility investor, entrepreneur, educator, and champion of Detroit. In her role, she invests in and strategically supports the entrepreneurs and mobility companies moving the Western world. Please welcome Jessica.
Thank you all, and good morning. And as I make my way up here, I'm going to invite you all to start with me here. So I'm going to ask everyone to stand. Don't be shy. Okay, I can see you all standing. So my question for you is, who started the day using an app to get here? If you did, you can go ahead and sit down. So that's pretty much everybody. The rest of you can sit down as well. And morning is really the perfect time of day for us to tackle this next topic, which is mobility, because like most of us start our day with a simple question, which is, how long will it take me to get there? And that app usually answers. It says 17 minutes, definitely do not take the 405, or take that second exit. But a better question might be, who pays to shape that answer that comes back to you? And who gets paid by that response? Because your car sends data, your phone is sharing your speed, and your location is training algorithms. Because in mobility, your personal habits and the way you commute are shaping markets. This is what I call the kinetic attention economy, where your movement is monetizable in new ways, and where your attention and intention come together. Because in your commute, time, your attention, and direction are all monetizable in new ways because they carry value. Now, you would argue that as long as we've been moving, someone has been selling to us, right? In the 1920s, newspapers and newsstands were full of ads from brands crying out with their goods and their wares. And in the 1930s, those same ads followed us into our cars. But what's different today is the infrastructure, the technology, and the scale of that monetization. And when we think about the attention economy, we often talk about scrolling when we're sitting still, maybe at home on our couch. But in the kinetic attention economy, again, it's that attention and intention coming together in new ways. And unlike scrolling, your commute has direction, it has context, and it has timing. And it's your movement itself that's key to the platform. So I'll talk to you about this company. It's called Affectiva. You heard I work with startups. Not an investor here, but it's one that I know well. So Affectiva has come up with a concept of emotion AI. So the way they do this is they use the camera that's in your car, and for the Europeans in the room, this is already required by regulators. And using that camera, they can pay attention to how you're feeling. Are you paying attention to where you're driving? Are you having a stressful day and you're frustrated by somebody around you? And they actually marry that to understand your very emotional state. And the second company is one called Biopac. They take this one step further. So this is a map of your eye movement, again, using that same camera that's in the car. And what they can do is marry that camera information with other data, such as ECG, which is your heart rate, something called galvanic skin response, which is your actual arousal and attention, and even your EEG, your very brainwaves. So if you thought your brainwaves were private, I'm here to tell you there's folks interested in that. In Detroit, there's a startup that's working to develop an EEG-enabled headrest for professional drivers to understand, are they actually paying attention and focused on the road? So in both examples so far, we've seen where attention and intention come into play. But we haven't actually talked about that movement piece yet. So let's add that in. In the commute economy, the market for connected car data is projected to reach $800 billion by 2030. And the market for traffic and smart city data is projected to reach $15 billion in the next 2 years. This is, of course, massive. But you might ask yourself a question, where is this data actually coming from? And I know you've been paying attention. It's from our commutes. So on average, in the US and in Europe, we spend 25 minutes a day commuting, and we typically take between 3 and 4 trips. Meanwhile, our connected cars are generating on the order of 25 gigabytes of data per hour. Now, before I leave you all thinking that we're just feeding our data into the matrix, and there are, of course, big companies interested in this data, I'll leave you with a little bit of hope, which is that data can also be used for public good, to help our public officials and our city planners understand how to make our cities better. And we'll come back to this example in a minute, along with the example of how retailers are using this information. But I first want to talk to you about a couple of other examples. That's namely advertising, insurance, and personalization. So let's talk about advertising. McDonald's in 2023 spent $390 million on advertising. And just a few years earlier, in 2019, they spent $70 million on a form of advertising known as out-of-home. And it's the ads that you see here. This is billboards, this is ads that you see on public transit, or maybe on those benches while you're waiting for the bus. And brands love these ads because they reach us where we are when we're moving around during the day commuting. But they also hate them because they don't know how effective they are. And so there's new technology, like the one you see on the split screen here, that lets advertisers of all size serve those ads to us in our cars. And yes, this data is linked to the GPS from your car. So the advertisers know, did you actually respond? Did you go pick up that snack? And the automakers themselves are sharing in the revenue from that ad. So think about the next time you go and satisfy your snack craving. The second example is insurance. This is something we all carry if we're drivers. But the idea of usage-based insurance flips the concept on its head, which is instead of paying for the privilege to drive, your car or your vehicle is going to share information with your insurer. And that information is going to include how, where, and how well you're driving. So your trip literally becomes a data stream right back to your insurer. This third example, sticking in our car, will push some of those other thoughts that we had earlier to the next level. So Ford Motor Company just recently filed a patent where they've developed technology that your car will listen in on your conversations. Now, many of us already think our smartphones do this, but the companies swear they do not. In this case, the automaker is saying, yes, we will. So you might be driving down the road with a friend and say, gee, I've really been thinking about sushi. And the car will chime in, hey, there's a Nobu right around the corner. Do you want me to take you there now? And if you respond, again, of course, the automaker and perhaps the advertiser will participate in that revenue. So these are brilliant from a business model perspective, right? Because you're moving, you're talking, you're looking around, and you're expressing intent. The transportation tools that we have are not just moving us around anymore. They're translating our very behavior. So back to our city planners here for a second. There's a lot on the screen. You don't need to understand all the examples, but our city planners do, because they want to understand and have access to data in the aggregate, such as mobile location, your GPS, credit card spend. And why do they want that? It's because they need to understand the total vehicle miles traveled in the city. Maybe they need to understand demand for electric vehicles. Perhaps they're trying to look at the demographics of transit riders. or potentially the spending overall in the city from visitors or residents. And similarly, those retail brands are very interested to know where we're going because they need to choose where to put their stores. And so they're paying for real-time foot traffic data to help them make those decisions. It's quite literally an X-ray into the heartbeat of a city. So again, as we think about these examples, we have advertising, insurance, personalization, but also our city planners and retailers. This is quite literally the places that we call home. Now, I'm sure you're asking a question by now, which is, who on earth shapes how these companies use this information? And it really depends on what market you're in. So if you're in Europe, mobility data is considered personal data. That means it's subject to GDPR. So you have the right to understand who's gathering this information, how it's being used, but also to request that it be deleted. Here in the US, it's much more of a wild, wild west, where certain states, like California actually, are coming to the front in terms of shaping those regulations about how that data is used. And for entrepreneurs, maybe that's an opportunity in the moment, but as we see new regulation coming into the market, they will of course have to respond. And then China, another large market, China takes a different approach, which is that users must be able to opt in to this data gathering. New laws were passed in 2021. And data needs to be stored on Chinese soil. But this is for a very particular reason. And it's because that mobility data at the aggregate level is perceived as sovereign national imperative. Think about that. So as I start to close, I want to tie this topic of mobility to some of the other themes we've already heard, and you might hear the rest of the day. We'll talk about regenerative business models. Sure, it doesn't take much of an imagination to understand how this data flow could go only one way to benefit the businesses and marketplaces that are using it. But what if we actually change this data flow so it goes both ways? So it's benefiting us through personalization, maybe through reduced traffic, but also for the communities where we live and we call home. It's going to take new forms of leadership for city officials and companies to be good and responsible stewards of our personal data and to make sure, of course, that the right cybersecurity protections are in place. It doesn't, again, take much to imagine that lots of this information may need to be shared across platforms. And so what will those business models and new alliances look like? And then finally, it's almost certain to be true that AI will be our co-pilot for all of this along the way. Every day as we move, the kinetic attention economy generates insight, information, and opportunity. So I hope that the next time you open that app and ask, how long will it take me to get there? You'll also ask yourself the question of who's participating in using my data along the way. Thank you so much.